Tsutomu Nihei, one of the biggest names of horror manga and just manga in general. Having reached mainstream popularity with its very first title, 1997's Blame, Nihei quickly became an important name both inside and outside of Japan, having even written for Marvel. He would eventually find his next big title in 2009 with Knights of Sidonia. Nihei is a name that brings respect, but I have a problem with Nihei. And to be clear, I have no problem with Tsutomu Nihei the person, as I have no reason to dislike him personally. But what I do have, and I'm going to explore in this video, is a problem with how Nihei writes his manga. But before we go into why I dislike him, let's talk about why I should love him. Because Nihei should, by all means, be either my favorite or one of my favorite mangaka of all time. First of all, he is a horror mangaka, and I love horror. Not only that, but he's a horror mangaka that has inspired some of my favorite manga, including two of my favorite mangaka of all time, Kyo Ayashida of the Retro fame and Tatsuki Fujimoto of Chainsaw Man fame, which if you've been in this channel long enough, you'll know that I absolutely adore both series. And of course, not only is Nihei inspiring some of my favorite works, its inspiration is also some of my favorite works. By looking at his manga and art, it's clear that he takes a lot from H.R. Giger, one of my favorite painters, and of course, of the movie Alien, which is also my all-time favorite movie. At first glance, Nihei looks like a mixture of everything that I love, the absolute central point that my tastes meet. With all that I had known of Nihei before actually reading his manga, it was hard to imagine that even if he didn't end up being in my favorites, he would be a mangaka that I wouldn't really enjoy. Which is probably why it was such a disappointment when I finally read my first manga from him, Biomega. Biomega disappointed me so much that it was actually the first manga I ever gave a negative score on my anime list. Of course, this was still relatively early in my manga reading days. I don't think I even had read 50 manga. And for almost a decade, I didn't touch Nihei again. Sure, there was part of me that was interested in checking Blom, just because of how much people talk about it, but the fear that it would end up like Biomega meant that it was always pushed back, as I prioritized manga that I had more interest reading, or that I thought had bigger chances of me to enjoy. However, 9 years after I read Biomega, a new opportunity to check Nihei would present itself, as I found myself with a group of friends on Discord, as all of them were going to do a group read of Nihei's Abara. So I decided to join them and give the mangaka a second chance, and the result? Well, almost from chapter 1 I had flashbacks of Biomega. I reminded myself why I didn't enjoy that manga, and it showed me that it wasn't an isolated incident. Instead, I simply disliked Nihei's core writing style. So I decided to continue reading Abara and its included one-shots to try to fully understand why I disliked it. My conclusion is that it simply is storytelling style. Nihei is well known for convoluted and confusing stories, which by itself can alienate a lot of people, but Nihei is really the complete opposite of spoon-feeding you the story, but also in a bad way. His stories tend to start in a midpoint, with the main characters already in their journey to whatever their final goal is. But Nihei doesn't really care to tell you much about that goal, or character, their backstory, or even motivations. Rather, we are told that this is character X, and if Nihei is feeling particularly charitable that day, he may tell us what they are trying to do. For a counterexample, Dorodoro also starts in a midpoint, with Nikaido and Kaiman already hunting magic users for a goal. But throughout chapter 1 we are informed of the goal, the reasonings for that goal, and we're given some understanding of the main characters and their relationship. This may not sound like a big problem, but I do think it's big enough to ruin the enjoyment of a lot of people. There's certainly other manga that may have confusing plots or not make sense at first, but the biggest problem in Nihei's manga is that this is exclusive to the reader. The characters in the manga know what's going on, they have far less mysteries to solve than us, they're far more knowledgeable in the world than us. This creates a heavy barrier where you feel confused about the plot as Nihei intends, but you feel like you shouldn't because the characters are not. This is a big reason why the mentor is one of the elements of the hero's journey. If you don't know what the hero's journey is, I've already did a video where I cover it in more detail, link will be in the upper corner, but a oversimplified explanation is that it's a wheel or a list of various elements that are extremely common in stories about heroes rising through some sort of evil or problem. The mentor exists because a lot of times these stories happen in worlds with different rules, settings, and history. So the mentor is a character that drops the needed information to a character in the story that is also as unfamiliar to the rules as us. In Lord of the Rings that will be Gandalf, and in Harry Potter it will be Hagrid, for example. In Nihei's works, there is no mentor, nor a character in need of a mentor, leaving only us to feel alone and alienated. To me, honestly, this gives me this feeling that Nihei doesn't want me to read this manga. I don't feel welcomed. It's similar to being invited by a friend to a party where you only know that friend, but you're not his best friend, so now you're stuck in his party, seeing everyone trade inside jokes with one another that you do not get. Nobody is telling you to leave, but they aren't engaging with you either, leaving you to just stay there, alone with your cup, while everyone else has a good time. That's Nihei's manga. It's a combination of feeling unwelcome in manga form. And before someone drops this argument, I do understand that Nihei's manga is supposed to feel alienating. His worlds are dark, cold, and brutal. And yes, that's true. But what I feel alienated isn't in the world or its brutality, but rather I feel alienated by Nihei himself and his refusal to let me into his story. This is also why I don't find the convoluted lore really that appealing. I find that the biggest reason as to why his manga can be confusing is really because of Nihei withholding information, not necessarily because of any complexity in the world building or story itself. Which of course isn't helped at all by the very similar character designs of all the characters. And look, I understand that a lot of mangaka have same face syndrome. But it really is a bigger problem in Nihei's manga just because I don't know what's happening anyways, without being confused by the characters too. But the final, bigger consequence that this all has is that by alienating us from the story and the characters, it stops me from caring about them. There's absolutely no attachment, and that makes everything so boring, because there's no investment on my part. But to at least end on a positive note, I do understand part of the appeal of Nihei. If we're talking about visually, the structures and monsters are amazing. Nihei worked in construction before he was a mangaka, and he applied that knowledge to Giger and industrial influences to deliver worlds and structures that are mesmerizing and hauntingly beautiful. Even if you don't care about the story, even if you downright hate it, there's at least something to take from the visuals. And Nihei is probably the mangaka that fits the black and white color scheme of manga the best. This is how I imagine his worlds without a tint of color, just tones of white, black, and the occasional gray. The monsters and non-human creatures also look amazing, and there's a decent amount of double spreads that definitely deserve a pause just to absorb. And it's not like Nihei doesn't play into his strengths. Most of the manga is a fast read with barely any text or exposition. Rather, we're left to enjoy the events and backgrounds with occasional breaks in pacing. So it's not like I absolutely hate reading Nihei's manga, as I still think there's still stuff for me in there. But I can't pretend that this problem doesn't ruin a lot of the enjoyment for me. But you may have noticed that I didn't mention Blom in the manga that I've read. Yes, in fact, my opinion of Nihei was very much solidified with Abara and by Omega. Those two experiences were enough. It left me with enough experience to properly explain to people, to friends and other manga fans, why I didn't enjoy reading Nihei's manga. But more often than not in that discussion, it would lead to the other person asking, "But have you read Blom?" Which is something I find funny, because whenever I said that I didn't and asked if it was considerably different, the answer was always not really. My experience with talking with people that have read or are reading Blom is that they are as lost and confused as I was when I was reading Abara or by Omega, so I don't really see why reading Blom would change my opinion. But I understand to a degree. Someone trash talking a mangaka without having even checked one of their most popular manga can leave a bad taste in your mouth. So I knew that if I wanted to make this video, I would have to check out Blom and see if it solved my problem or not. My findings? Well, I do think it does one thing better, but before we jump into that, I do need to leave the disclaimer that, as of right now, I still have not finished reading Blom. As a matter of fact, I only read around the first 3 mastery editions, which is half of the total manga, and some may disagree, but I think that's enough to comment on the series because honestly, how it ends is irrelevant to my main problem. Nihei's lack of the story foundation is a problem because of the problems it causes when you start reading the story, not when you finish. If Nihei info dumps everything in the final act, it will not solve my core problem at all. And this is something that is shown in Blum, as a lot of the information I feel should have been given to us in the first 2 or 3 chapters is given more than a third of the story. It's simply too late at that point. So Blum isn't that much of a step up at all, but like I mentioned before, there is one aspect in the story that I think it lends to Nihei's style well enough that I think it makes it, at the very least, the best Nihei manga I've read up to this date. A lot of this manga sees the main character, Kili, or Kiri, depending on the translation, climbing this weird world as more and more weird things happen in each section. It's almost episodical, and the things are as unexplained to us as they are to Kiri. This makes it so that we can, at the very least, have one character that reflects our knowledge of the events happening. I still find it very hard to connect or care about any of the events, but I do think it's slightly better in execution. As far as this later manga, Knights of Sidonia and Aposim, I have no idea. It does seem like these two have a different style to it, as if they are part of another era of Nihei. And you know what? Maybe I'll enjoy that more. I'll have to read them and see. If people think they are different enough, please let me know in the comments and maybe I'll read them and do a follow-up to this video or on those two and how they compare. But for now, that's all I have to say about Nihei. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you hate me now? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like horror manga, Maskman and I have gathered 5 recommendations for you to read next. To see them, click on the video on the left, and if you watched it here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.